there's no way I can handle a cage, man. I don't care. You gotta go down. It's gotta be that way.
What do a broke waiter making $6 grand a year, a self-proclaimed Buddhist warrior, a skydiver who refused to fake anything, and the future director of The Hurt Locker have in common? Somehow, they all collided to create Point Break, a film so reckless, so chaotic it nearly fell apart behind the scenes. What you saw on screen wasn't just acted, a lot of it was real. The danger. This wasn't just a movie, it was a gamble that shouldn't have worked, but absolutely did. So how did it all come together? And what really happened behind the camera? Let's count down 25 insane facts you never knew about Point Break. This script started in a restaurant for just $6,000. Long before Point Break became a full-blown action classic, it was being written in the middle of late-night shifts at a Greek restaurant in Santa Monica. W. Peter Eliff wasn't sitting in some quiet office. He was juggling orders, moving between tables, and squeezing in lines of dialogue whenever he could. No connections, no guarantees. Just a story forming piece by piece under pressure. And when he finally sold that script, he walked away with just $6,000. What's even more surprising is how close the story stayed to real life. The character of Bodhi didn't come out of nowhere. Eliff based him on someone he actually knew. A waiter named Bodhi McCoy. Same name, same presence. That calm, fearless energy that defines the character? It was already there, just waiting to be written down. The idea itself came from a simple but unusual connection. A surf lesson in Malibu crossed paths with a news report about a series of bank robberies. Most people would never link the two. Eliff did, and that one question turned into the entire film. And somehow, that small beginning turned into something massive. This movie had 3 different titles before Point Break. This movie almost had a completely different name. A movie can completely change depending on just one thing. Its name? Sounds small, right? But in Hollywood, a title can decide how you feel about a story before you even watch a single scene. And Point Break went through 3 different identities before it finally landed on the one you know today. The first was Johnny Utah, named after Keanu Reeves' character. It was direct, almost too direct. The studio rejected it quickly because it felt narrow, like the entire film was just one man's story, not a world of undercover work, surf culture, and bank robberies. It didn't capture the scale of what was being built. Then came Riders on the Storm, taken from The Doors' 1971 track. It had atmosphere and style, and it felt closer to the surf world the film was trying to explore. But it created a problem. The story had nothing to do with the song itself, and producers worried audiences would expect a music-driven film instead of a crime thriller. The mismatch was too strong to ignore. The final title, Point Break, came later in production. In surfing, it describes the exact spot where a wave meets land and breaks with force and precision. That idea matched the film's energy in a way the other titles never did. It finally gave the story a clear identity. And that shift is where everything starts to get interesting. Swayze auditioned for the wrong role. What happens when the actor who becomes the heart of a movie walks in wanting the opposite role? That's exactly what happened with Patrick Swayze in Point Break. He showed up thinking he was right for Johnny Utah, the straight-laced FBI agent. That was the plan in his mind. Clean lines, controlled energy, the good guy role. But something strange happened when he read the script. The character that pulled his attention wasn't Utah at all. It was Bodhi, the surfer, the outlaw, the man who believed that life only made sense when you pushed it right to the edge. There was a philosophy in Bodhi that didn't feel written. It felt lived. And Swayze connected with that instantly. He started reading Bodhi differently, not as a villain, not even as a traditional antagonist, but as someone chasing a kind of freedom most people are too afraid to even think about. That shift didn't go unnoticed. The casting team saw it immediately. The energy change was obvious, and without hesitation, they moved him into the role of Bodhi. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. There's an alternate version of Point Break that almost existed. Matthew Broderick was considered for Johnny Utah. Johnny Depp auditioned. So did Val Kilmer, Charlie Sheen, and Willem Dafoe. Catherine Bigelow refused to make the film without Keanu Reeves. When Catherine Bigelow signed on to direct Point Break, the studio had a very different idea of what the cast should look like. They wanted proven names, safe choices, actors like Johnny Depp or Val Kilmer, people who already carry box office weight. From their perspective, it made sense. Less risk, more certainty. But Bigelow wasn't interested in playing it safe. She had seen something in Keanu Reeves that didn't show up on casting charts or industry predictions. He wasn't the loudest presence in the room. He wasn't the most polished action star at the time, but there was something in him, something quiet, steady, and emotionally open that made him feel real. The studio didn't agree at first. They saw Reeves as too early in his career, still defined by Bill and Ted. Not an FBI agent chasing violent surf criminals, not a leading man for a high-budget action film. They pushed back, hard. Bigelow didn't move. She held her position and kept pushing Reeves forward. She believed audiences wouldn't just watch him, they would trust him. And in a film like this, that mattered more than anything. Eventually, the studio gave in. Swayze and Reeves had already shared a screen 5 years before Point Break. Before Point Break ever existed, Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves had already crossed paths on screen. Back in 1986, they both appeared in a hockey film called Youngblood. It wasn't a major film, and neither actor was a star yet. But something important was already forming between them without anyone noticing at the time. Swayze played Derek Sutton, a seasoned player with control, confidence, and experience. Reeves played a young rookie goalie still trying to find his footing. One character carried authority, the other carried uncertainty. It wasn't dramatic on the surface, but the contrast between them was clear. And that contrast would later become the emotional engine of Point Break. Years later, the dynamic returned, but reversed and amplified. In Point Break, Swayze becomes Bodhi, the calm, magnetic force pulling everything toward him. Reeves becomes Johnny Utah, the structured outsider slowly pulled into a world he doesn't fully understand. The roles feel designed to fit them, but they weren't. They were discovered through time, experience, and chance. Keanu Reeves trained every day for 2 months in Hawaii. Keanu Reeves had never surfed before Point Break. That single detail shaped one of the most demanding preparation periods of his early career. The production required authenticity on screen, which meant the surfing had to be real, not simulated. Training began in Hawaii and continued for 2 months without interruption. Each day followed the same physical cycle, paddling into open water, repeatedly losing balance, getting pulled under by waves, and returning to the board again. Progress was inconsistent. Some sessions showed small improvements, others reset everything back to the beginning. The ocean environment offered no adjustment period. Conditions changed constantly, and control was never guaranteed. Surfing, in this context, became less about performance and more about repetition, until movement stopped being conscious and became instinctive. Beyond surfing, Reeves also trained with real FBI personnel to understand procedural behavior and mindset. Additional coaching with UCLA quarterback trainers helped shape the athletic foundation of Johnny Utah's background, giving it physical credibility rather than surface detail. That preparation later influenced other roles that required similar physical discipline. Patrick Swayze did 55 real skydives and nearly lost his life more than once. Patrick Swayze didn't discover skydiving because of Point Break. He was already doing it for years. But once Bodhi came along, that hobby stopped being a pastime and turned into something far more extreme. Almost like he stopped separating himself from the character entirely. During production, the studio tried to shut it down, not because they doubted him, but because the math was simple. One injury could shut down a $24 million production overnight. So the rule was clear. No jumping. Stay safe. Finish the film. Swayze didn't follow it. He kept jumping anyway, quietly, between shoots, outside approval. Not as a publicity stunt, but because stopping didn't seem like an option anymore. Over time, the risk stopped being theoretical. He fractured 4 ribs during filming and later admitted there were moments where things came far closer to disaster than anyone on set realized. At some point, the studio had to adjust. They couldn't fully stop him, so they negotiated control. One properly planned skydive would be filmed for the movie. Catherine Bigelow jumped into the sky and directed in freefall. Catherine Bigelow didn't direct Point Break from a distance. She entered it physically. When it came time to shoot the skydiving sequences, she strapped on a parachute and boarded the plane with the crew. Then she jumped. That same approach carried into the surfing sequences. Instead of watching from shore, she positioned herself in the water just outside the frame, sitting on a surfboard and communicating with the actors as waves moved unpredictably around her. She didn't separate herself from the environment. She became part of it. At the same time, another major creative force was working only a short distance away. James Cameron was editing Terminator 2 during the same period. The two would exchange footage and ideas, essentially stress testing each other's work in real time while both films were still being shaped. A camera was built from scratch just to keep up with one chase scene. That chase through the suburban streets doesn't feel like it was filmed. It feels like it was survived. Fences, backyards, kitchens, doors slamming, people running at full speed without a clean path forward. And the crew ran into a simple problem. Nothing they already had could keep up with it. The cameras were either too heavy or too controlled. They made movement look safe, and this scene wasn't safe. It needed something that could move fast, stay light, and still hold the image together while everything around it fell apart. So instead of slowing the scene down, they built something new. James Muro, the camera operator, helped design it. A handheld 35mm rig with a stabilizer attached so the image wouldn't completely break apart while running. They called it the Pogo Cam, and it didn't behave like a normal film camera. It shook, it bounced, it reacted to every step. But that was the point. The chase wasn't supposed to look clean. It was supposed to feel unstable, like there was no control left in it. Patrick Swayze wasn't even in the most famous chase scene. The backyard chase, Reagan mask, fences, and sprinting through the suburbs are some of the most recognizable moments in Point Break. It moves fast enough that most people assume Patrick Swayze is right in the middle of it. He isn't. Not a single frame. At the time it was filmed, Swayze was in Europe promoting Ghost, which had just turned into a massive global hit. Press tours, interviews, and premieres. His schedule was packed across another continent while the chase was being shot without him. The entire sequence was handled by a stunt double wearing Bodhi's Reagan mask. Every jump over fences, every sprint through backyards, every physical beat that made the scene iconic wasn't performed by Swayze. It was someone else carrying the character through that moment. A real pit bull was thrown straight into the chase. The chase is already moving at full speed when everything suddenly breaks in a way you don't expect. A pit bull comes flying straight into the frame, right at Johnny Utah. There's no build-up, no warning, and no moment to process it like a normal stunt. It just happens. This isn't a visual effect or a clever edit. A real trained dog is physically thrown into the scene. The goal is not shock for shock's sake. It's chaos inserted directly into motion, so nothing feels controlled or predictable anymore. Keanu Reeves reacts instantly. There's no acting rhythm to fall back on. He catches the dog mid-air, holds it for a split second while it struggles, then sets it down and keeps running like the chase never stopped. That reaction is real because there is no time for anything else. That split-second moment is what makes the scene stick. It doesn't feel staged. It feels like something that interrupted reality for a second and kept going. That's why it stands out even years later. Anthony Kiedis got 3 seconds of screen time as punishment. Anthony Kiedis from Red Hot Chili Peppers joins the film as Tone in the Ex-President's Gang. On paper, it's a cool cameo. A quick appearance inside a major action film with a strong ensemble cast. But behind the scenes, there's a problem. Fight rehearsals are required for safety and timing. They are not optional in a production like this. Kiedis skips them repeatedly, saying he was busy. That creates a direct issue. In a stunt-heavy film, missing rehearsals affects everyone on set. So the production makes a fast, practical decision. The role stays, but the presence is reduced to the minimum possible. In the final cut, Tone appears in the first major confrontation, gets hit once by Bodhi, and is taken out immediately. The total screen time ends up being about 3 seconds. He enters, gets hit, and is gone. It's quick, clean, and final. James Cameron wrote key scenes and got 0 credit. James Cameron is not someone who stays quietly in the background of a film. In a 2025 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, he openly said he wrote parts of Point Break and didn't receive the writing credit he believed he earned. That's not a small claim, especially coming from someone already known for shaping major Hollywood blockbusters. The official ruling tells a different story. The Writers Guild of America reviewed the contributions and decided Cameron's input didn't meet the threshold required for a writing credit. On paper, that means he worked on the script, but not enough to be listed as a writer under Guild rules. Screenwriter W. Peter Eliff has also consistently acknowledged Cameron's involvement when asked, so the reality sits somewhere in between official credit and creative influence. That same summer in 1991, Cameron was not just involved in Point Break. He was also directing one of the biggest films of all time. Point Break opened at number 2 behind Terminator 2. The summer of 1991 wasn't just big for action movies. It was controlled by one creative force moving in 2 directions at once. James Cameron was at the center of both Terminator 2, Judgment Day and Point Break, 2 films released almost back-to-back. Terminator 2 arrived first on July 3rd and immediately exploded at the box office. It didn't just perform well, it reset expectations for what an action film could look like. Big budget, R-rated, technically groundbreaking, and still emotionally driven. It dominated the charts instantly. Then, just over a week later, Point Break arrived on July 12th. It opened strong, pulling in around $8.5 million in its first weekend. For a new release, that's a solid start. But it was stepping directly into the shadow of a film that was still climbing. Terminator 2 didn't slow down. It stayed at number 1, while Point Break entered at number 2. Point Break eventually earned about $83.5 million worldwide on a $24 million budget. Not a record-breaking blockbuster, but a strong performer that slowly grew in reputation over time. It didn't peak immediately like T2. Its impact came later, through rewatch culture and long-term influence on action filmmaking. The final scene was never shot in Australia. The ending of Point Break is presented as if it takes place at Bells Beach, Australia, during a once-in-a-lifetime 50-year storm. The waves are massive, the water is violent, and the film even labels the location directly on screen, so there's no doubt in your mind. But none of it was filmed there. Not a single shot. The entire sequence was actually shot on the north shore of Oahu, Hawaii. The production never traveled to Australia for the finale. What looks like one continuous Australian coastline is really a blend of real Australian reference footage and Hawaiian surf footage carefully edited together. The night surfing scene was shot in daylight. The scene looks like midnight on the ocean. Dark water. Heavy silence. Two figures floating in something that feels endless. But that night you're seeing, it never actually happened at night. The entire sequence was filmed in daylight, right at the edge of sunset, when the light is almost gone, but not quite. That timing matters, because there was no room for error. In 1991, filming real night surfing wasn't just difficult, it was reckless. Cameras couldn't see properly, safety was thin, and the ocean doesn't care about production schedules. So the crew used a trick called day for night, pushing the camera right into that final slice of natural light. Everything had to be precise. 1 minute too early, it looks like sunset. 1 minute too late, it's black. Bigelow didn't just film a scene here, she engineered a feeling. Malibu gave the mood. Hawaii gave the waves. The final cut stitched both together like they were always meant to exist in the same moment. Real surfers were cast as the ex-presidents. Most films would train actors to look like surfers. This one flipped it completely. Instead of teaching actors how to surf, Bigelow brought in real surfers and taught them how to act. That decision changed everything about how the ocean feels in this film. Two members of the ex-president's gang were actual professional surfers. No stand-ins for movement. No fake rhythm. Just real bodies that already understood waves. One of them, John Philbin, didn't need instruction on how to stand on a board or read water. That knowledge was already built in. Johnny Utah's name was built from real NFL legends. The name Johnny Utah sounds like fiction, but it was built from reality. Writers pulled inspiration from NFL legends like Johnny Unitas and Joe Montana, names that carry instant weight, like someone destined to perform under pressure. Even the character's backstory was engineered with purpose. Johnny Utah wasn't just an FBI agent, he was a former college quarterback whose career ended because of a knee injury. That detail isn't decoration. It defines everything about how he moves through the story. Someone who once had potential, lost it, and is still trying to rebuild identity through risk. And here's where the line between character and actor starts to blur in a way that feels almost too clean to be accidental. Keanu Reeves also played hockey as a teenager. He was a goalie, good enough that teammates nicknamed him The Wall. Then a knee injury ended that path too. The film didn't blow up. It grew into a classic. A movie doesn't need to dominate the opening weekend to become legendary. Some films explode fast. Others take their time. Point Break did something far more unusual. It grew in value the longer it stayed alive in culture. Made on a $24 million budget, it pulled in $83.5 million worldwide. Not a record-shattering number, but a strong return that already marked it as a success. At the time, it wasn't the loudest film in the room. That space belonged to Terminator 2. Point Break was the one that people discovered a bit later, almost like a secret recommendation passed between viewers. Then something interesting happened. It didn't fade. It multiplied. Cable TV kept running it. VHS tapes moved from house to house. Bigelow and Cameron were making their biggest films at the same time. While Point Break was being shot in oceans and plains, another film was being built a few miles away that would reshape visual effects forever. That film was Terminator 2. And here's the part most people don't expect. Both films were being made at the exact same time by a married couple. Catherine Bigelow and James Cameron weren't just two directors in Hollywood. They were partners working at peak intensity, constantly sharing ideas, footage, and pressure. One day, it was skydiving rigs and surf sequences. The next day, it was liquid metal robots and futuristic action design. They didn't work in isolation. They pushed each other. Cameron reportedly pushed for more raw physical danger in Point Break, less polish, more impact. Bigelow, in return, pushed Cameron toward stronger emotional grounding within all the spectacle. You can actually feel that exchange if you look closely at both films. A stage show turned the film into a live game with random people. Years after the film came out, someone had a strange idea. What if Point Break wasn't just a movie anymore? What if it became something unpredictable? Something alias? That idea turned into Point Break Live, a stage show where the lead role wasn't acted. It was assigned to a random audience member every night. One person, pulled from the crowd, suddenly becomes Johnny Utah. No rehearsal, no training. They're given cue cards and pushed into the center of a live performance while professional actors around them carry the story. And it doesn't stop there. The show leans into chaos on purpose. Cue cards get read wrong. Lines get forgotten. Scenes go off track. And instead of breaking the experience, that unpredictability becomes the entire point. Every performance is different because the lead actor is different every single night. The Adios Amigo jump is 100% real. There are action scenes that look real, and then there are moments that actually are real. The Adios Amigo scene sits in that second category, and once that lands, it changes how you watch the entire film. This is the moment Bodhi steps to the open door of the plane, looks back at Utah, says, "Adios, amigo," and disappears into the open sky. No hidden stunt swap. That is Patrick Swayze in the air, committing to a real skydive in real time. To understand how wild that is, you have to track what led to it. Swayze was already an experienced skydiver before filming. Not casual experience either. He was pushing into high-risk jumps because he was genuinely drawn to it. The studio saw that and immediately panicked. From their point of view, this wasn't art. It was a liability. So they banned him from unsanctioned jumps. That should have ended it. Instead, it escalated. Swayze kept jumping anyway, quietly, outside production approval. Eventually, He broke 4 ribs during one of those secret jumps. At that point, the situation stopped being manageable. Point Break helped shape the extreme sports era. In the early 90s, surfing and skydiving weren't mainstream culture. They existed on the edges. Small communities, local scenes. People who already lived that lifestyle didn't need convincing. Everyone else barely noticed. Then, Point Break arrived and changed the way those activities looked to a mass audience. Not by explaining them, by framing them as something else entirely. Surfing wasn't just a sport, it looked like freedom. Skydiving wasn't just adrenaline, it looked like escape. The ocean stopped being background and started feeling like a destination for meaning. That shift matters, because culture doesn't move only through facts, it moves through desire. And this film didn't argue for extreme sports, it made them look like the most alive way a person could exist. That image spread. A joke became a permanent MCU reference. In The Avengers, Tony Stark meets Thor and immediately gives him a nickname, Point Break. It's a throwaway insult, a quick comparison. Blonde hair, surf movie energy, nothing more than Stark being sarcastic. At that moment, it reads like a joke that disappears after the scene ends. Just a line for fans to laugh at and move on. But the writers didn't forget it. Years later, in Thor Ragnarok, Thor is locked out of the Quinjet. He cycles through passwords. Nothing works. Not Thor. Not God of Thunder. Not Son of Odin. Then, almost out of desperation, he tries the one name Stark once used as a joke, Point Break. The system accepts it. That moment quietly does something interesting. A 1991 action film becomes part of a modern superhero universe, not as a reference, as functional code. A password, a key, a working piece of narrative infrastructure. And there's a deeper layer most people miss. Patrick Swayze died in 2009, years before the MCU even began its rise. He never saw this connection. Never saw Bodhi echoed inside one of the biggest franchises in cinema history. But his performance didn't vanish with time. It migrated. It became a language inside another story system. Not as nostalgia, but as something active. Something that still opens doors. Point Break is really about what it costs to feel alive. Point Break looks like an action film on the surface. Surfing, skydiving, bank robberies, and FBI chases. But underneath all of that movement, the real engine of the story is much simpler and much heavier. What does it cost to actually feel alive? Bodhi represents one answer to that question. He doesn't chase money or power. He chases intensity. Every jump, every wave, every risk is about breaking through numbness. To him, safety is not peace. It is a slow decay. The more controlled life becomes, the less real it feels. Utah sits on the other side of that same question. At first, he is there to stop Bodhi. Simple mission. But the deeper he goes, the less simple it becomes. Bodhi's way of seeing the world starts to make sense in ways that are hard to ignore. It pulls at something already inside him. That pull isn't random. Before the FBI, Utah was a quarterback. Someone built for pressure, timing, and moments where everything can change in a second. Then, a knee injury ends that version of him. Not just the sport, but the identity attached to it. That loss never fully leaves. And that wraps up 25 insane facts about Point Break that most people never knew. From real skydives to casting twists and hidden production risks, this film goes deeper than it ever gets credit for. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe for more breakdowns like this, and drop your favorite fact in the comments. See you in the next one.